Hi, and welcome to Quilt Street. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras.
And I'm Rhonda Lother.
And today we're going to be talking about fabric cutting best practices.
Yes, and when you cut, there are three basic tools you need. You need your cutting mat, your ruler, and your rotary cutter. And we're just going to talk about some simple best practices you need. First and foremost is safety. I cannot emphasize enough to always keep the safety on your rotary cutter when it's not in use. On this particular rotary cutter, you mash the button to release it. On the flip side is the switch that allows you to move the safety back and forth. So I'm going to push this button and I can toggle it off, and you can see now I'm ready to cut. Anytime you set this down, even if it's just for a minute, just make sure, engage the safety again before you set it down. Develop that habit now. It's a great habit to have.
Because you do not want to get your knuckle in the way of an unprotected rotary blade.
They are super sharp. Yes, really are. I have cut myself badly doing that, and it's just a great habit to develop from the get-go. So the first thing I want to talk about is how to cut straight. This is a mistake that I made quite often, especially when I was new to quilting. In my mind, it made sense to cut from selvage to selvage. So in other words, if I had my fabric on my mat like this, to me, it made sense to line up the fold on this line. And as you can see up here at the top, I have my selvages aligned. They're all in a straight line.
It looks nice and square.
It looks lovely from up here. It looks great. And so I made a cut doing that. And this is the result. I think you can see it's not straight. I have what I call a buckle. It angles out this way. And that's not what you want. When we sew strips together, they have to be perfectly straight. And if I have an error right here in step one, that's only going to compound the further I go along. So let's talk about how to make those cuts perfectly straight.
Yeah.
You may remember from an earlier episode where Mary Kate showed us how to find the straight of grain on a fabric. She ripped it. This is the same piece of fabric. And when I flip this over, it kind of becomes more obvious why my strip did not come out correctly. Once I flip it over, you can see this excess fabric right here. That's how off my strip was.
Yeah, and again, that's just an issue of how the fabric gets wrapped onto the bolt, and what the way it's distorted and kind of pulled in the production process. This happens with all manufacturers. It's just the way it goes, and it's just something that you should kind of expect to have to deal with when you bring home some yardage.
That's exactly right. It's not the fault of the fabric company. It's just how the machines roll fabric on a bolt. It just gets a little distorted sometimes. So let's go back to what Mary Kate showed us in the beginning, where I'm going to she tore the fabric to find the straight of grain, just to jog your memory. And so now, if I line this up, matching the straight of grain, now that I've done that, it's a little more obvious at the top. Now the selvages don't line up, but that's okay.
It can be hard to get used to, because we think that, oh no, if the selvages match, then everything's where it should be. But
that's a mistake I made all the time. And I wondered why do my strips curve? Why are they not straight? Why are they buckling? And that was why. So even though these are matched, where she tore the fabric, we had just a little slightly ragged edge. So I like to make just a clean cut, just to get that straight. I'm not really trying to measure right now. I'm just trying to get a clean edge. I'm lining up my ruler at the bottom, just so I'm sure that my cut is going to be straight. And I'm just going to disengage the safety. Here's my cutter. I'm going to put the cutter up against the ruler as a guide. The ruler has a nice thick edge. I'm going to put the cutter right against it, using my hand to secure it. And these particular rulers by Quilter Select are really good about gripping the fabric. I don't have a lot of slippage when I use these, so this is great for cutting a long length of fabric. Maybe I keep a little pinky right at the edge just to make sure it doesn't slip. But I'm just going to make a clean cut and pull this away.
And I just want to point out that you kept your blade nice and perpendicular to the mat. You don't want to
angle it. You don't want to cut it, at an angle. It's straight up and down. Like she said, it's perpendicular. Now, I'm going to set this down for just a moment. So again, I'm going to engage the safety. Make sure that blade is sheathed. Set it down. Now I'm going to flip this over so that my straight edge is to the left, my clean cut edge. I'm going to make sure this lines up. Make any adjustments you need to do. All right, so now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up. And so I note that the 1/2 inch is on the right-hand side right here. So I want to make sure I'm looking at the 2.5 inch mark right there. It goes up the ruler so you can see it. And I want to make sure, in this particular case, I'm cutting 2.5 inch wide strips. So I want to line up that left edge of my fabric with 2.5 inches all the way down. And again, because this ruler does not slip, it may take you just a moment to align that perfectly, just like you want it.
It's really time very well spent.
It is.
And, you know, quilters get a bad rap sometimes, or maybe honestly earned to some extent, of being really sticklers, right? Being really, really particular about some of these things. This is an area where it really does matter. We're not doing it just because we can.
Right.
It's because we know that these little problems, if you're off even a 1/16 of an inch over and over and over,
it adds up. It makes a big difference in your quilt.
makes a big difference. And all of a sudden, you know, you start getting out, you're building out your quilt, and all of a sudden things aren't fitting.
You're like, wow,
Or
what
they're
went wrong?
wavy or whatever. And so the time you spend, as Ron is doing right now, is what you need to do.
Yeah, just make sure everything's lined up as you want it, because the time you spend here will save you much time later. All right. So I'm satisfied that it lines up at 2.5 inches all the way down. I still have a habit of keeping maybe a pinky over the edge just to keep it lined up. I'm taking my cutter. I'm going to disengage the safety, turn it, and it's going to be perpendicular, which just means it's straight up and down. I'm going to put the edge of the blade next to the edge of the ruler. It's nice and thick, so I have an edge to go by. I'm going to make a clean cut straight across. And there we go.
Very nice.
And I'm going to set this down. Again, engage that safety. Anytime I'm letting go of this rotary cutter, I want the safety on.
It's out of the way for you?
Yes. And we'll put this aside. Now let's see if this came out straighter than my first effort. It did. Look at that. Yeah. It lines up just great on those lines. It is straight. I'm satisfied with that. All right. A lot of times, once we cut a strip, we're going to cut it further into squares. And so we can save time by cutting 2 squares at a time, folding it like so. It was already folded from where we cut it before. I'm going to line it up. And the main thing here I want to point out is I don't want to use these selvage edges. I'm going to flip it over so you can see it just a little bit better. The selvage edge is more tightly woven. It'll have the manufacturer's name, the company name, the name of the fabric, etc. You don't want to use that in your quilt because it is tighter. It's going to behave differently. You just don't want it. On one side, it'll have the print. On the other side, it may just show up as little dots. And so again, you don't want
There
either
can be
one.
a temptation if you're really trying to economize or squeeze out like one more patch from the end of a strip to be like, well, it's going to be hidden in a seam allowance and no one will notice. But it really does make a difference because it doesn't stretch or give in the same way as the woven fabric. So do your best to avoid
Yes,
using
again, it can make a little micro adjustment that won't work in your favor. And so, pardon me. So again, I can use this same ruler, the same 6.5 inch by 24 inch. I can certainly use this ruler to cut this strip with no problems at all. However, if you have it, I do like to use a smaller ruler when I cut smaller pieces or smaller squares or strips. So again, this is a 6.5 inch ruler. The 1/2 inch is on the front. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of these little selvage edges. So I'm going to just line that up. I'm going to make sure the line on my ruler lines up with the edge of the fabric. It does on both ends. Take my cutter, release the safety, and once again, make that clean cut, disregard that niblet. I'm going to put the safety back on again before I set my ruler down. All right, now I have a clean edge to work from. I'm going to turn this little strip over. line it up using my lines on the mat. Take my ruler again. And once again, I'm going to be cutting 2.5-inch squares. Because this is a 6.5-inch ruler, the 1/2 inch is right here on the front end, so note that. So I'm going to line it up at the 2.5-inch mark, so that in that case it would be right here. And just for extra insurance, I'm going to make sure it's lined up right here at the bottom and along the side. You can see all that lines up just great. Disengage my safety. Make my cut. And there's my 2.5-inch squares. I get 2 for 1. Two for one effort. And I will just continue cutting straight down the line.
Now, there are those who will say they don't use the grid lines on their mat when it comes to this step. They're only going to rely on the lines of their ruler to line it up so that even if it's, at an angle, they're lining it up.
That's an excellent point. Yes.
I do like to use both. And I see that you do as well.
I do.
So I don't think that you can say that there's any one right way to do it. It's whatever makes you feel like you're getting the most accurate cuts possible.
True. Or maybe you can see it better in an angle. If it's too many lines going perpendicular to one another, you might be able to see it better if you cut at an angle and just use your ruler.
In our next video, we're going to be talking about how to achieve the perfect scant 1/4 inch seam allowance.